Live in studio. We know you're doing the full circuit this morning, so thanks for joining us. So you make the announcement yesterday afternoon about your support for road tolls on the Gardiner and DVP. What is the process like now in terms of approval? Where does this go?
Well, the City Council has to decide to either authorize or not going ahead to do the further work, because the report didn't answer the questions that a lot of people are asking. Well, you know, how much will the toll be? And there are various recommendations that are contained in this preliminary report. What technology would you use? When would you implement it? You know, would you charge a flat rate as opposed to a distance traveled rate? And so these are all questions that have to be answered. So if the City Council in principle says at its next meeting coming up in a couple of weeks, you know, yes, we think that work should be done because we think this is worth proceeding with, then that work will be done, and you'll get a report back sometime in the winter that says here's what we think should be done. I'm
sure you have a pretty good sense of the pulse of council. Do you see this passing?
I hope so. I mean, yes, I think it should. You know, I certainly think the result that we had a couple of years ago is not an acceptable result, where council at that time had in front of it all the options and voted every single one of them down, which left us in a situation where when it comes to answering the question, how are you going to pay for the transit that same council itself has approved over time to fix the nightmarish traffic that's going on in the city, they said the answer is none of the above. And that's just not an acceptable, it's not an honest answer. I'm trying to be honest with people that I have a plan for transit, a 15-year plan, but and the plan is meant to build transit, to fix traffic, but you have to answer the question of how you're going to pay for it. And so I'm optimistic that the council has itself realized we can't go on kind of pretending this traffic problem doesn't exist or pretending it's just going to go away. You've got to build the transit, and transit isn't free. And I think people get that. And I think they're also getting, Gurdeep, that if I had the options in front of me, which I did, to say, well, we could massively increase property taxes to pay for it, or we could sell assets like Toronto Hydro, which you can only sell once, that they realize in their heart of hearts those are not the right ways to go, and that this kind of way, as much as people don't love it, is going to be a better way and fairer, in the sense that as well you get people in areas not inside the City of Toronto who don't pay City of Toronto taxes, who are using those roads, who've never been making any contribution to those roads, and they now would be asked to make a very small contribution.
You know, I hear what you're saying, and I think it's interesting because it's such a divisive issue, and I've been looking at some of the feedback from people who are in support of road tolls. I think it's a great idea. There are others who don't like this notion. What do you say to some of your critics who might say, well, listen, you campaigned on no road tolls, and now you're doing an about-face of sorts? It
wasn't really a significant issue in the last election. Now, in 2003, which is 13 years ago, I did say at that time I thought it was the wrong answer. But you know what? The traffic has got much, much worse in that period of time. And I think it is now one of those things where if you look at the options again, property tax increases, massive property tax increases, or selling assets like Hydro, because they're the most valuable ones we have, or doing something like this, I think this is the best available option, knowing none of them are perfect. You know, I mean, you could put forward any suggestion you want, and there's going to be some group of people saying, oh, that's terrible. But the bottom line is transit is not free. We must build the transit to fix the traffic, and I have a plan to do that, but I need the money at least to pay for our share and get the rest from the other governments.
You're never going to please everyone with any decision you make,
really. No matter what you do, you're not going to please on this and every other issue, and that's just the way it is.
Does this require provincial approval, and do you see any red tape on that front?
It apparently does require some, you know, technical sort of provincial approval. I saw the different people from the provincial government, the Premier and the Minister, speaking yesterday, and they didn't seem to suggest they were going to stand in the way of it. So I hope they don't. I mean, I think, again, they have said to us over time that we have to step up and accept our share of the responsibilities for these things, and I agree with them. I think they should be doing more for Canada's and Ontario's largest city, the economic engine of the country, but that's a discussion for another day. We have it all the time with them. But for now, I think we have to step up and say what we're going to do to pay our share of these projects and to get some help from people who have been using our roads, the City of Toronto roads paid for by City of Toronto taxpayers who don't live here and pay taxes here. So that's what I put forward yesterday.
And you mentioned the charge for this. You know, the thing that's being kicked around is $2 flat fee as opposed to a distance based on distance, like on the 407, for example. What's the thought process behind that? How was that number sort of reached, and why is that?
I just prefer a flat fee. I mean, I think it's simpler for people to understand, and it's a relatively modest amount. As for the magnitude of that fee, it really sort of depends on how much money you want to raise, and that's why our officials are going to have to take a look at this and decide what they think is best in terms of how much money we need for the transit and so on. I should say as well that the money will go into a separate fund for transit. It will be rigorously audited by the Auditor General, so people can be assured this is not, you know, sort of leaking off into some other place. It's just going to be for transit and infrastructure, and it will be jealously guarded for that purpose.
Costs of rebuilding the Gardiner, much higher than initially anticipated. As a result, are any of these tolls, if this does happen, will the tolls have to raise at some point to make up for what's needed for the excess money on the Gardiner?
No, I mean, the fact of the matter is that the money to pay for a large part of the Gardiner replacement, which has to be done simply because that expressway is at the end of its useful life. I mean, it's literally on its last days. And most of that was provided for in the city's capital budget for the next 10 years. So the money from the tolls is new money that's going to come in, and most of that will be available for transit. But it was also described by me and in the reports as being available for road repairs as well. And that's why it's important that we establish the principle that those who use the road, including those who don't live in the City of Toronto, should help in a small way to pay for it.
We know you're looking for ways to make up revenue, and this supposedly will put together $200 to $250 million a year. That is not an insignificant amount. Another thing you mentioned yesterday was the tax on hotels and Airbnbs. That could generate about $20 million a year. What was the thought process behind supporting that and maybe not some other revenue streams?
Well, I mean, I think, one of the advantages to it, obviously, is it's paid for by visitors to the city. And, of course, pretty well every city anybody could name has a hotel tax of one kind or another. The notion of adding Airbnb to it was just to be fair. As that becomes a more popular option with more people and it's, in effect, competitive with hotels, I think it's fair that those people should pay that tax as well. Much of that money goes to market the city as a destination for tourists and so on, but it will produce some $20 million extra for the city to help build transit and offer childcare and do all the things the city does. And so I think it's fair because it's asking visitors to pay a cost of keeping this a great city for them to come visit.
We got 5 seconds left. Last question for you very quickly. How quickly will we see road tolls?
I think it'll be a couple of years just to get the technology picked and to implement it and so on.
Mayor John Tory, thank you so much for joining us.